gave me this £5,000 grant, and that really got me kick-started. It was the moment that I felt, okay, well, it's all well and good having an idea, but now someone else believes in me and they are putting money behind me. Now I have to make it happen and deliver on this. There's always a level of unknown and uncertainty, but I've never let that phase me as such. Like, I kind of embrace uncertainty, and so I lean into that, and it kind of excites me rather than scares me per se.
Do you feel there is an entrepreneur in everybody? Hi, I'm Richard Osborne, and this is Drive, the business podcast where I speak to business owners, entrepreneurs about their life, their journey, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Today's guest is Rajeeb Day, somebody well educated who was expected to go on the corporate ladder or working within government, but instead decided to get into the rough and tumble of small business. Somebody who was instrumental, the co-founder of Startup Britain as part of Tony Blair's government. Rajeeb has seen every level of startup business, working with apprenticeship projects, as well as supporting and sitting on the board of a number of organisations. He shares with us today the tips, advice, and what he's learnt along the way of what makes a successful startup. Raj, thank you for joining me, and it's great to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. No, thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
It's I love doing some of the research and prep for today and having sort of conversation with yourself, because the thing that really stood out to me about yourself is it's like the pace in which somebody so young, at such a young age, really hit the ground running from the moment you come out of university to sort of launching into what, if you don't mind me saying, sort of high profile projects and impact into business, which is, or to use an investment term, like a bit of a unicorn. So it was a really interesting read. Really like sort of doing that sort of research. And from this conversation today, I'm really looking forward to sort of getting underneath the skin of that and starting off like what really sort of motivates you and gave you that drive at that very early age. And I think really probably where my research started, and please sort of fill in any bits that I couldn't find, is where you started at Oxford University looking at sort of economics and management and the studying there. So it goes without saying that you sort of started at a good foundation, a good pedigree. Like a lot of leaders, country leaders, prime ministers sort of come from the same sort of that education. But that's where me looking in the story starts. How does that fit in with your memory?
Well, actually, my entrepreneurial journey started just before that, actually. So I first kind of started as an entrepreneur when I was 17. So literally the year and a half before joining, studying at Oxford, it started with a social enterprise called Student Voice, around giving school students a voice in their education. And I'd say, I always call myself an accidental entrepreneur. So I kind of fell into it. I didn't know the term entrepreneur at the time. I didn't necessarily know what I was doing was being entrepreneurial. I literally had an idea. I saw, that in the education system in the UK, the school students who are the customers in the education system didn't really have a voice about the education they were receiving. And I found out that most countries in Europe had national bodies representing them and wanted to do something about it. And so I suppose I was connected to an organization called Unlimited, which is a foundation for social entrepreneurs. And this was, I was doing my A-levels at the time. And that really was pivotal in kind of changing my career path, because they gave me a £5,000. I still remember they came to where I live. We met in a local library, the awards director, and he, asked me about my idea and, what I planned to do. And afterwards gave me this £5,000 grant. And that really got me kick-started. It was the moment that I felt, okay, well, it's all well and good having an idea, but now someone else believes in me and they are putting money behind me. Now I have to make it happen and deliver on this. And that really, I'd say, changed my career path. And as you said, as I went into Oxford, I just continued on that journey. So getting involved with the Enterprise Society when I was there, becoming the president of the Entrepreneur Society, starting various ventures afterwards. But yeah, I would say that the actual entrepreneurial journey itself started at 17. But if you go, even further back, I'm sure if you speak to my parents, they would say that I'd always demonstrated kind of entrepreneurial tendencies and I had those attributes. But obviously, when you're young, you don't necessarily, and particularly back then, I don't think there was as much of an awareness of entrepreneurship in schools, and over the years it's been great to see that has really changed, and people talk about running a business and being an entrepreneur in schools, which was not as much the case at least when I was in school.
When you say there's more in school about entrepreneurialism, what do you see?
Yeah, I think there's been a whole range of initiatives, so kind of not-for-profit company organizations and charities like Speakers for Schools, and the work that Young Enterprise have done, and I don't know if it's still running, but a few years back there was a competition called Tenor, which a friend of mine, Ollie, had kind of co-founded, where give kids £10 and see how they can multiply that, and so I think over the years there have been a lot more kind of initiatives. You've got kind of enterprise focused kind of courses now taking place. There are kind of technical kind of colleges and stuff where it's studied, and so I just think there's a lot more awareness than there was. So I'm 37, so when I was at school, I don't think it was talked about. But I would say, you're right, Richard, that the experience is probably still patchy, and it kind of depends where you go, the level of resources they have, the kind of teachers that are there, their exposure to entrepreneurs, their ability to attract local entrepreneurs or people to come and speak and inspire the students. Because when you do your work experience in schools, it's still quite standard. Like there isn't really the option people don't necessarily have the opportunities to connect to entrepreneurs and go do some work experience with them. They may not know who they are, they may not know how to approach them, and that really, I suppose, was the premise of my first venture when I was at university, which was internships, which was about entrepreneurial internships. So moving away from the school space but to the university space, the same challenge was there, which was university students are only exposed to banks, law firms, accountancy firms, big corporates. When they do the so-called milk round, you didn't have any exposure to the startups or SMEs. They didn't have the brands or the HR departments to go and engage with university talent, and so that's why I thought to myself, aspiring bankers, lawyers and accountants do internships. What can an aspiring entrepreneur do? Well, other than starting your own business, the best way to learn about enterprise is to work in a startup, but how do you find those opportunities? And that's why I started the listing site to connect startups and SMEs to interns and graduates, really, to solve the same problem that is kind of that also happens at school level, but even more so even at university. But even that, I would say, the culture has changed over the years. If I think about when I graduated in 2008 to today, there is far more awareness of working in startups, being a founder, being an entrepreneur. There's just, in the media, whether it's kind of TV programs, like even the Apprentice format that changed from working for Alan Sugar to actually running your own business. Those programs have their pros and cons, but general mass awareness, I think, has definitely gone up over the years.
I've got some questions about sort of Startup Britain that relates to that. But before we get to that part, one of the things that intrigues me is when you're in an environment and some may have a perception, or perhaps accurate perception, but you're in an affluent environment because Oxford has a reputation, has an image, and it's where the creme la creme may go. And you generally, if you're in that environment, you're in a comfortable environment as well. And you're right. going back across all universities generally, but particularly in an Oxford University, you're expected to go into a particular channel, whether that be for government or whether that be sort of large corporate, at a senior kind of level as well, generally. But you're thinking about startups at that time, and you're thinking about the sort of ragtag groups, dare I say, who are sort of like scraping by, scrapping around, trying to, getting their businesses off the ground. And that's where, let's think about, going from a university environment, particularly an Oxford University environment as well, and thinking about these are great opportunities and we can go and do this, and both two-way support here. That intrigues me, and I'd love, why was that on your radar?
Various things. So firstly, because I had already, by the time I'd entered Oxford, I was already started the social enterprise student voice and giving school kids a voice in their education. I actually found myself being more preoccupied with that than even university life, because that was quite time consuming. And so I would basically study in Oxford, but I'll be back and forth in London running this organization, setting this organization up. And so I had already had that kind of entrepreneurial bug. And then I felt that, that my time at university is going to be short. I need to engage with wider university life. And that's when I got involved with the Oxford Entrepreneurs, which was the Society for Student Entrepreneurs. That was great because, you got to connect with like-minded people who all kind of felt that they wanted to do something different, do something for themselves. And kind of through that, I then became the president of the society. I took a year out of my degree to run that society full time. And I had amazing exposure to, all the dragons from Dragon's Den, or like high profile entrepreneurs would come and speak to our society students and members. And so I was exposed to these people, managed to develop that kind of strong network and community early on. I had done internships at both Bank of England and Boston Consulting Group, and was very fortunate to have job offers at both organizations. But I kind of realized I didn't think I wanted to work for anyone. I didn't think I'd be good as an employee. I appreciated the experience, but it didn't fulfill me per se. And in all honesty, actually, BCG were really nice. They had said, look, we'll defer your job for 2 years, go and do what you want to do and come back to us. But I knew, 6 months in after leaving university, that I didn't want the safety net. I didn't think it was healthy to have that, because I felt that, if I know at the back of my mind I've got this job to fall back on, I wouldn't necessarily give it my all. So, I contacted them and said, look, I really appreciate what you've done here, but I don't intend on availing this opportunity, so it's best that you hire someone that's going to go and work for you. So I think it was a combination of having already started something early, recognizing that if you have an idea and you can get people behind it, things can happen, getting that kind of adrenaline rush, then surrounding myself whilst I was at university with like-minded people, being exposed to very successful entrepreneurs. There's a combination of all of that gave me that confidence. And then, I don't want to downplay the fact that my family have been very supportive in whatever I wish to do. And I think, it'd be unfair if I didn't have that, and if, for example, I'd have been kicked out or I didn't have family and I'd have to start, earning a big salary straight out of university, I probably wouldn't be able to do what I've done, because that's just a fact of life, right? And I think that one of the things that I kind of often say that is being an entrepreneur, particularly at that early stage, is it's just an extension of university life. You're just used to living on very little, getting by with very little, and just making things happen. And whereas a part of me thought, if I take a job now and I get used to a nice, comfortable salary, a nice kind of level of lifestyle, it's going to be even harder for me to make the transition back and let that all go. Whereas actually, I don't know any different, because I never went into that life. I never had that corporate job and that nice salary and all the perks that come with it. So for me, it was just an extension of university life by going into continuing being an entrepreneur straight out of university. So in a way, I kind of admire people that have done it differently and that have actually taken that leap, and when they've later in life they've got a family, they've got mortgage, they've got far more risk to then step away from that and to start their own business. Arguably that's even more difficult than what I did, which was just shun it from day one and think that this is not for me. I'm going to go on and create my own path, so to speak.
Having heard that question so many times of when's the right time for me to start, the reality is when you've got nothing to fall back on, that, in my view, gives you that fear factor, that determination, that sort of like, where's my next dinner coming from kind of drive, that you have to make this work now. For as long as you've got that safety blanket behind you, that little sort of comfort to wrap around and think, I've still got this little bit of salary coming in, you're not going to give it all. And then in the same vein, you mentioned programs like The Apprentice, or you mentioned Dragons earlier. I've got investors here, and I know my investors won't like me doing another job on the side, or another primary job as well, because whether you've got investors or it's your own business, you need to give it your all. You need to put 100% into it. Otherwise you're putting 50% into it, so it's only got half the chance of success, whilst you're putting your other 50% into your safety net. I like that analogy, not analogy, but that what you just described. But also, family is important, whether it's your spouse supporting in what you're doing, or being a part in what you're doing, or you're, like many cases, we've had other guests who have parents behind them who have enabled that to happen, particularly in the way that I'd say the economy is and things here and now. Because the cost of living's so much more as well. So when I started, I use the quote now, I started quarter of a century ago. Things were not as expensive to live quarter of a century ago. The mortgage was a fraction of what it is now. Today it'd be crazy. I wouldn't want to even, I can't imagine starting from the ground now. People do, and it's amazing they do, but I can't imagine it. You mentioned...
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say just on that, though, is that I think there are more opportunities to start the kind of side hustle. I suppose it depends on what fulfills you, right? So the people that is like, maybe I'm not ready, that's very understandable, and there is a fear. The question is like, what is actually holding them back? Is it the reality of, am I going to earn X to kind of pay my bills? And I think the question there and the answer to that is, okay, well, there's the concept of you've got your 9 to 5, but there's also the 5 to 9, which is like, what could you do in your spare time on the evenings and weekends? You can start a micro business. You can use kind of tools online. You can set up a Shopify site. You can use free marketing on social media. You can get stuff up and running. Depends obviously what you're trying to do. Obviously, if you're trying to side a real estate based business, then no, you're going to need a high level of investment up front. But if you want to, there are so many tools, software, like things out there where you can just trial and just test the waters before you make the full leap. I think that is a big difference versus 20, 25 years ago, where just starting something, like, typically have just a bit more consideration. Like, it's a bit harder to just trial something out and whatnot. But I also take your point that, in order to really be successful, you do have to give it your all. But I can empathize, I can understand why it holds people back, where they do have mortgages, kids, whatever, and they can't necessarily take that entire leap of faith. So I think it's complex. But what I would say is the mindset, or the question that I ask people is, what's the worst that can happen? Right? Mm-hmm. And I think this is sometimes that holds them back. Sometimes it's just the fear of failure or the fear of rejection. And if you turn that around and say, actually, okay, so someone might say no, but what if they said yes? What would then happen? And I think sometimes it's actually more a psychological blocker than anything else, than even a practical blocker. It's just that fear, as you say, in a negative way, that holds them back. And challenging someone to really understand, what is it really that's holding them back? Is it a practical thing around financing, or is it more a psychological thing? I think on the psychological one, that's where you can support someone to overcome those barriers.
Yeah. You mentioned you dived straight into internships as your first business because you obviously had the bug at that point. You was like, this is what I want to do. And although you had the experience of student voice, I'm making an assumption here. Internships was a loan without a bit of sort of grant money to get you up and started. Unlimited. I think that comes with a bit of mentoring as well, doesn't it? Yes.
Yep.
So again, so I'm making an assumption here that you didn't have that wrapped around you. I see it sort of it didn't hit the ground running, and in that sense, so you was out there getting a startup up and running from the ground up. How scary was that?
So I suppose the evolution of internships is interesting because it started as a simple listing site just for Oxford students when I was a student. So it started again similar vein of with Student Voice in a way, but it was more in response to a problem that I was facing, which was well, not necessarily I was facing, but I recognised, which was that as the president of the Oxford Entrepreneur Society, I was often being approached by startups that wanted to advertise jobs to our members. They didn't have a brand of a McKinsey, a Google, a Goldman Sachs or whatever to get the attention. So like they would approach me, I would have to put something in a newsletter and say, okay, there's this startup that's looking for someone, do you want to get involved? And so it kind of started through that, which was just these companies are approaching me, they want talent, they can't do it in any other way. So it was already like a listing site whilst I was an undergrad. And then when I graduated in 2008, the start of the graduate unemployment crisis, Lehman Brothers Bank had collapsed, the job market had become really tough. As I said, I was fortunate I had these two job offers I could have gone into, but I just thought, you know what, that's not the right path for me. I want to do something positive. I want to be able to help people recognize there are alternatives in the market, and we need a more entrepreneurial narrative in society, kind of, you know, make a job rather than take a job type narrative to go out there. And so I wouldn't say it was scary per se, because I knew what I was doing was helping people. I knew and I was quite lucky that, you know, early on, I think the timing was quite apt because of the situation. It got picked up in the Daily Telegraph quite early on by one of the reporters. We got, you know, some good kind of traction, and we were doing something quite different. So yes, I think there's always a level of unknown and uncertainty, but I've never let that phase me as such. Like, I kind of embrace uncertainty, and so I lean into that, and it kind of excites me rather than scares me per se. And I have to say, like, on that journey, I've had people who have kind of supported me, or I've just gone out and found, whether it be angel investors or mentors and advisors. And I think it's really important early on that you develop that network of people around you to support you, and you'll be surprised by how open and helpful people can and want to be.
I'm building up a picture of somebody that I'm putting words in your mouth here, but I'm going to lead this. I'm going to be at the front of this. I'm not going to be in second, third place, or just somebody else will do that. I'm going to lead it. You mentioned earlier that opened doors to people like from the Dragon's Den, the Dragons themselves, or other sort of leaders in business. So I can see now, as we've been talking, sort of how that can lead itself to somebody who's not long out of university, starting their first business, is now finding themselves sat in 10 Downing Street talking about a venture to bring the whole country out of the credit crunch through, and if I get the words right here, an enterprise-led recovery. Is that sort of a fair assessment of sort of that question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to, the time being 17, being at school, and also, one of my favorite quotes is from Gandhi, which is "Be the change you wish to see in the world." I think that's just generally my mentality, which is if I've got a problem with something, I'm not going to moan about it. I'm going to try and fix it. And I think that's just innate in my personality. Like I'm always jumping to solutions. Like even if you just talk to me about something, I'm always thinking, who can I connect you to? How can I solve this? Like that's very much in my nature and character. But I think that comes from a lot of that kind of self-belief and drive that I got early on from that time of being at secondary school, setting up an organization. Again, I've been, I don't know, fortunate may be the word, or timed. I don't know what it is, but I've kind of been thrust into public life or spotlight quite early. So I remember, when I was 17, the Times Education Supplement, which is the most respected publication in the education kind of industry, arguably read by teachers and whatnot, they had a big article on, I think it was a page 3 feature on me and what I was doing around student voice and stuff. And so this is me, I remember the picture of me in my bedroom with my A-level notes and stuff on the wall and whatnot. And so I kind of was thrust into this thing of having to deal with the media. I then was asked to go speak at the political conferences for all of the major political parties about the role of student engagement and kind of young people in democracy and what kind of... So I think those opportunities came my way, and I think and a lot of people, not a lot of people, but people may get those opportunities, but they may not embrace them. And I think the difference with me was that I said yes to them. And I think what happens is when you say yes to one thing, it becomes a snowball effect. You get more confidence that actually age is nothing but a number. You only hold yourself back. And I think psychologically you might think, I'm 17, what am I going to say to a room full of head teachers or at a party political conference? But actually there's a reason people are inviting you to speak. And I think once you do it, you get positive feedback, you have the confidence to do something else. You then start building up a community, you start building up a network of other people that are change makers and trying to change things for the better. And then you get the opportunities to kind of work with government. And again, the Startup Britain thing was quite funny because I ended up meeting Lord Young, who sadly has passed away now, but he was the government's enterprise advisor. He was speaking at an event at the Institute of Directors, and I just went up afterwards to speak to him and tell him about internships and the work that I was doing with internships. And he said, come and see me, set up a meeting. And so I went to see him. I was speaking about internships, and then he said the Startup Britain, so Startup America had just launched 3 months before. President Obama had launched that, and that kind of came up in conversation. Then separately, myself, Ollie Barrett, and a few other people like Emma Jones were discussing, we need something like this. And the two things kind of timing kind of worked really well. Having just met Lord Young, he was like, let me set up a meeting with a guy called Steve Hilton, who was the Prime Minister's special advisor at Downing Street. We got together. They said, we want something similar to Startup America, but we want entrepreneurs to lead it. So it was right place, right time, networks, people coming together. But that happens over time. It happens by putting yourself out there. I've known, Ollie, one of the co-founders, for many years. When I was an undergrad at university, he would come and get involved with the activities that we would run at Oxford Entrepreneurs. So the key, I suppose, message and takeaway I want to say to people listening is start developing that network early on. Don't let your circumstance, your age or whatever hold you back, because that's more psychological. Like, people don't, like, if you've got something important and you're doing something interesting, people will be willing to support you.
Do you feel there is an entrepreneur in everybody, or along the lines of what I was saying?
So this is the whole born or versus made kind of debate, and I think there is there's definitely something to be said about having entrepreneurial traits and attributes early on. So as I said to you, I think I demonstrated a lot of those at a very young age, and I think therefore I probably had a higher predisposition towards being an entrepreneur. I think everyone has the scope to be entrepreneurial. Whether they act on that and then become an entrepreneur is different. And I agree with you that I was having this conversation with someone else actually earlier this morning, that I don't think it's suited for everyone to run their own business. Like, there are certain things you need to do. That one of the most important things is, like, the level of comfort you need with uncertainty is just going to be far too great for a lot of people to stomach. But I think the purpose of a campaign like that is just to wake people up to the possibility. I think it's important to recognize that it is a possibility. And I think back then there literally wasn't the awareness as there is now of it as an option. But I think once you know it's an option, it's important for you to then explore, what does it actually mean to be an entrepreneur? What does it take? What are the skills? And do I think I've got those, or could I develop them or not? And I think then it's an important decision to decide, like, yes or no. Overall, I would agree with you that it's not for everyone. Like, I think if everyone could do it, everyone would potentially do it. And therefore, just like anything, like, it will suit some people more so than others. I think it's important that people recognize, A, it's an option, and then B, there's also how you channel entrepreneurial traits in different environments. So the whole concept of an intrapreneur, right? So how can you be an entrepreneur within an enterprise and start, you don't necessarily have the risk of, like, am I going to earn a salary and whatnot, but you're there, you're coming up with new innovation, you're having to kind of get stakeholders on board, launching a new product, your own separate P&L. So it's like being an entrepreneur, but within a big business, right? Yeah. So it's about how you demonstrate entrepreneurial traits in different environments effectively.
I think that leads on to sort of one of the later things I wanted to ask you about. So it's a great segue in. Talking about startups as well and people starting up in business. It's a regular report. So the ONS, Office of National Statistics, release data for every year that talks about sort of the sustainability, like, life cycle of businesses. And it's been the same for a long time that, and it's everybody bands this, 50% of businesses fail within the first year, give or take. I'm more interested in the 5-year life cycle. And because that, to me, paints a bigger picture as to just over 90% of businesses fail within their first 5 years. And there's a whole host of different reasons how or why that can happen, but ultimately it is what it is. But once you get past that 5-year mark, the tail is long. You're kind of like, it's almost like you're out of the woods. It doesn't become easy suddenly overnight, but your chance of sustainability and continuing the business beyond 5 years significantly increases beyond, like, any sort of recognition. With the experience you've had working within sort of projects ranging from Startup Britain to all the other sort of Unlimited, you've gone from being sort of somebody who received a grant from there to actually being a trustee, and so many others. You've been exposed to a lot of startups. Based on that, what sort of things could people looking at starting up take into consideration, sort of top tips, if you will, to give them the best opportunity to reach that 5-year mark?
Well, yeah, it's a tough one, because I think, companies fail for a whole different raft of reasons, right? So one is around the idea itself. Like, is it sometimes you're too ahead of yourself and you're too early for the market, and particularly in tech, you talk about the concept of product market fit, and you need to recognize that things evolve. So if you're too wedded to the idea you launch with, that's probably you're going to have a high chance of failing, because the idea you probably launch with is not the idea that's actually going to succeed. So the real test is how you evolve and iterate. So you take feedback from the market, whether that be just direct customers or through testing and evolving. Like, in tech, sometimes it's even easier because you can have two versions of the same thing, and like they call like A/B testing, like show one audience this, show another audience that, see their response and whatnot. Obviously, something which is more like in retail, it could be more difficult. But then, if you've got a new product that you're trying to sell, you've now got platforms like Kickstarter or like crowdfunding platforms and whatnot, where you can actually see, is anyone interested in your business? Are they willing to actually put some money behind it and buy it? In the case of, say, something like a Kickstarter, and then they're basically pre-funding you to actually go ahead and make the thing. So I think, the first most important thing is to not be too precious about your idea. The second thing I would say is about reiterate what I said before around networking. I think, as cheesy as it sounds, not what you know, it's who you know. That is very true, that you can really accelerate your success by connecting with the right people. That could be in the form of investors, could be in form of advisors, it could just be mentors that are just helping you avoid the kind of potholes and the roadblocks on your way, that have just been there, done that. Because sometimes the mistakes you're going to make, that path is well trodden, and other people have made those mistakes before you. So don't be afraid to kind of ask for help. And I think the final thing I would say is just resilience. Sometimes you might feel like you're going to die as a business, but actually being resilient, thinking creatively, you can turn situations around. Like a lot of the most successful entrepreneurs will tell you many times that where they'd basically gone bust, but something happened where they fundamentally, they totally changed or pivoted their business. They started something totally different, or they did something wild. Like even if you take something like Airbnb and how they got going, and there's a really fascinating story about how they were hustling, and they created these cereals for, I think it was around the presidential campaign, and they were selling these kind of cereals to kind of make some money on the side, and then you just do what you need to do to get by. And so I think that resilience is really important, and not giving up prematurely.
Are the challenges that are facing entrepreneurs today pretty similar, or is it a whole new range of challenges they face starting today compared to when you first started on this journey?
I'd say overall there are some similarities. I think what is different is that the bit I mentioned around the ability to prototype, the ability to test, far more tools, platforms, the whole concept of crowdfunding, is newer than, like, at least when I started, it wasn't really a thing back then. So there are more avenues and opportunities today, I would say, than there have ever been. The tax breaks around SEIS and EIS investment makes it easier for people to kind of be angels and invest in businesses. Talent is an ongoing struggle, and I think that will continue being an issue post-Brexit. That's had a range of its other complications and whatnot. So I think, particularly, again, I'm coming from a tech, because that's the industry that I'm in. That's still a challenge in making sure that you've got the right people, that you need the right skills. But I would say that there is far more access to capital than there has been in the past. Generally, people are more well connected than they have been ever before. So I think a lot of the things have improved over the years. I'm not saying it's easy, and obviously, right now, as you know, the macro climate is very challenging. But at the same time, historically, if you look back, some of the best businesses have been started in a recessionary kind of environment and in a downturn. So it shouldn't be a reason to put people off. But I would say that if I look back, generally things have improved and gone in the right direction, I would say. Looking at things like availability of kind of funding and the improvements in technology, even if you take AI and how it has enabled people to, image creation through AI, or like creating copy and text, and so many things and tasks can now be simplified through using a tool like ChatGPT or other AI tools. So I think that's exciting, and a lot of new businesses will be created on the back of that, which gives people, a huge number of opportunities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know AI is something that we're spending a lot of time researching in from so many different areas of the business. And I'm even in conversations with a local university about a talent pipeline for prompt engineering. I had to try and sort of rack my brain for a minute, but that kind of skill set, which is AI is not going to take jobs, it's just changing the jobs. It's been like that for centuries as technology has evolved. Thinking about yourself now, what is the future for Raj?
So my current venture is a company called Learnably, which is a workplace learning marketplace. And so for me, the focus really is expanding. So we're making a big push into the US market. And so I'm spending a lot more time out there back and forth, which is new for me and an exciting opportunity and experience. So this is now my fourth kind of venture, so Student Voice, Internship, Startup Britain, and Learnably. And so with all of those things, there's been a strong thing around positive impact and social change. And as I kind of alluded to before, I think one of the biggest challenges that we face is around skills mismatch, and the rapid rate at which we as humans need to evolve because how quickly technology is changing too. And so for me, it's quite fulfilling to work on something around workplace learning and skills and adult education, because it is a challenge that I think is not going to go away anytime soon. So for me, I'm very invested and committed into expanding Learnably globally with a short-term kind of push into the US market.
Okay. And for you, do you see yourself continuing? You mentioned earlier about sitting on boards and just not being old people sitting on boards, but you share a lot of knowledge. You've something been involved in. At the moment, is your mindset looking at exit, for example, and looking at you have a strategy in place that will do this, and then this is the point where I step aside and I sort of look at other things? Is the current sort of business plan too early on that point, and you've got some more short, medium goals? What's the focus of your attention?
Yeah, so we're a venture capital backed business. So we did a Series A investment round end of 2021. Generally, the way these things are is that you then do Series B, Series C. So fortunately, we don't have to go back out to market probably until 2025. So we've got some time to really prove out the US expansion story, and our next round would most likely be led by US investors. On an exit, it's something that you can never prejudge per se. I think we wouldn't be looking any time in the short term to exit the business, but we do get approached quite regularly from companies that are interested in potentially buying or collaborating with us. So I'd have to kind of review that on its merits as and when they kind of arise. But for me, there's a lot to achieve over the next couple of years at least, to particularly to really expand what we're doing into the US market. That's the biggest opportunity for us. So I want to kind of see that kind of through to kind of fruition, and continue to grow the company, but obviously be mindful of what may come our way in between. So I think it's too early to necessarily say definitely it's going to be this or that. It's more about kind of growing what we've got into a new market.
Okay. And the last one, really, based on your experience, life experience, business experience you have now, if you were sat in front of your younger self, knowing what the journey that person was starting on, whether that's secondary, whether that's leaving university, you pick the point in time. What sort of key piece of advice would you give yourself?
Do you know what? It's an interesting. I get asked this question quite a bit actually, and I think there's potentially an implication that there's like. So the general advice I would give is enjoy the journey. But I think generally connected to my mindset is that I don't have any regrets. So there's nothing I would say to myself of like, look out for this, or don't do this, don't do that. I genuinely believe that everything that's happened to me over the 20 years since I was 17 to 37 has happened for my best and has been an opportunity to learn. So there's literally nothing I would do differently. Whether everything has gone absolutely to plan, absolutely not. I made some really silly mistakes at the beginning. I didn't really understand the value of equity, and I gave up too much equity in internships early on, which I had to then renegotiate and get out of. And so clearly there's some tactical stuff, but actually that was such an important lesson to go through. Would I really tell myself not to do it? I don't think so. So it's more connected to my psychology, which is like I genuinely think everything has been a learning experience. I don't have a conventional view on kind of failure, which seems very binary, like you succeed or you fail. But at the end of the day, I would just say enjoy the journey. It's a journey full of ups and downs, and just stick at it, which is, I suppose, what I've done.
I love that, because you are. I've been asked the question, and I thought I was a bit odd, because everybody seemed to be expecting me to say, well, don't do this, don't do that. And I'd always had this view that those things that have happened, and some of them haven't been very nice, they haven't been great. Yeah. And I go back way beyond business to like younger years, childhood, all the way through into business. And I sit there and I think, actually, the sort of the butterfly effect, the ripple of if there was a TARDIS and I went back and changed one thing and it impacted other things, you don't know what the impact would be. And the lessons I've learned from them, exactly as you said. So I've asked, and I've had the same answer you've had. And nobody, when I've asked other people, they've come up with these. And there was only one other person, in fact, a lady whose episode that hasn't been out yet, so she's coming out in a few weeks, who said the same as what you've just said, and then you. And I feel there's other people out there that share that same value and belief. You need to experience these things to sort of benefit and learn from them. And it doesn't matter how shaky or wobbly or at the time how tough it feels. Take from it the knowledge and learn to help shape your future decisions. The lived experience can't be beaten. So it's great to sort of somebody else who shares that same sort of belief. So brilliant. Thank you for that. Raj, it's been fantastic chatting with you. I want to thank you for your time. It's sort of so many lessons within there, and sort of people can benefit from. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard. Enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Drive. I hope you found it insightful and useful. But before I go, have a look at the app you're listening to this podcast on. See that follow button? Give it a press, and you'll be notified of all future episodes as they come out. It also helps us understand where most of our followers are and where to really be pushing this podcast to.